Thank you so much, Deidre, for joining us today on Nobody Knows. I am very excited about the conversation that we're going to have. Let's start at the beginning. Can you share how your financial story began and how it led to you to build Oh You Budget?
So I started with so much debt and I was financially illiterate. I didn't know anything about money. And I also kind of didn't care in a way because I was under the impression that, first of all, everyone has debt and that is normal. And also, I was very into, I am here for now. Like, I can live my life. And plus, I wasn't making that much money anyway. So I thought it didn't really matter. That's how I started noticing my money. And I'll talk more about like how I realized it was a problem a bit
Mhm.
later. But once I started getting out of debt, I was sharing it with everyone that I knew. So I had no shame. I was just like, this is what I'm doing. I'm getting out of debt. And so my friends and family always came to me to ask me like, oh, okay, like what kind of account should I use? Or like, how do you like get out of, how are you getting out of debt? Show me because I'm in debt. And like, I would sit with my friends and create budgets with them and create debt payoff plans with them. And so I was always that go-to person, even though I was in the journey. But the thing about it is my friends, they would listen to me talk about it and then they wouldn't take my advice, even when I'd sit there with them and I'd be like, here's the plan. This is what we're going to do. You're going to be debt free in 8 months. And they just wouldn't do it. And then I thought to myself, you know what, like, this is what I love to talk about. Let me share it online because then other people who want to listen to me will follow me. And if you don't want to listen to me, then you wouldn't be following me. So that is basically how I started OU Budget. It was just because I wanted to keep talking about money and saving.
How did you come up with the name Oh You Budget? Because it's different. It's kind of sounds conversational.
This sounds funny because it reminds me of the story of how Apple became Apple. It's like you have a certain time to come up with a name, and if you don't come up with a name, it's going to be Apple. Like it was one of those things. I was just like, okay, I don't have a name, and if I don't think of a name, it's going to be OU Budget. Like that's just what it was. Like I
Mhm.
never put real thought into it. I was just like,
Right.
I need to come up with a name. If I don't, that's the name, and I
I
didn't
love
come up
it.
with another name.
Well, I like it because, like I said, it sounds like you're having a discussion of someone who you're talking to that has like-minded interests as you're like, oh, you budget as well. Like it's kind of just,
Yeah,
and you become close friends or within your network.
I love that. Yeah, pretty
When
much.
you first realized you had a problem with money, what were the thoughts, feelings going through you? What was the first thing that you did to take action?
I didn't know I had a problem with money. And by the way, I'm like a recovering, well, I'm recovered now, overspender, impulse shopper. So back then, I was impulse shopping. I had every debt to my name, student loans, credit cards, store cards. I was using my overdraft as like
Mhm.
a pad for my paycheck. I had everything, line of credit, everything was maxed out. So I didn't know I had a problem until I went to the bank. And I think I went to the bank to like deposit a check or something. And the teller nearly fell out when she saw how much debt I was in because my line of credit with the bank. So all she could see was that my overdraft was in the negative. So my checking was
Mhm.
in the negative. I had my credit card maxed out, which I had only one credit card with them. And then the other product I had with them was my line of credit, which was maxed out. So she was just like, you're too young to be having this much debt. Like she cared more about it than I did. And in my mind, again, I was thinking like, oh, I'm young, whatever, I'll pay it off when I get a real job. Like it's not that serious. But when she was having that reaction to the debt that I have, in my mind, I was like, this is all you can see. Like I have two other store cards that are maxed out. I have
Mhm.
another credit card, another bank that's maxed out. And like I have student loans and she didn't even see that. And I'm like, your reaction off of this, like it must be that serious. So I was so embarrassed. Like that was the only time I was ever so embarrassed in my life because in my mind, I just had that thought, like, it's not that serious because I was told, not that I was told that it was not that serious. It's just like everyone in my surroundings, like family, friends, everyone had
Mhm.
debt. It was like kind of like not that big of a deal. So it was having someone, a stranger, like be so concerned about me that made me feel like, oh, this is a problem. So from then I was just like, okay, I'm gonna like figure out how to get out of debt. And that's when I started following Dave Ramsey. At the time, it was like perfect for the season that I was in because I was like, okay, I need to get out of debt. He had a plan and I roughly followed the plan. There's definitely things I would change if I were to tell anyone in that season. It was fine for me. And I realized that I am not a credit card person. Well, I am now. That's all I use now. But before, I realized I wasn't a credit card person. And I had to start using cash because I was in debt and I kept getting more and deeper into
Yeah.
debt. I used the envelope system for me to get out of debt. And then I used like the jar system too. I moved from like envelopes to the jar. So like I put money in the jars
Oh my
and
gosh.
spend just cash. It was a really long process.
You actually like go into my next question of like, how did you actually get yourself out of 42K in debt? Because I feel like just saying that, like, yeah, it's a lot, but like once you're actually in it, I feel like it would be very tedious and long. And I feel like there would be a lot of times where you would want to give up, as well as like not feed into your habits that you were doing previously that were bad habits, but you're used to those habits.
Yeah, I actually, it took me a really long time. I want to say it took me about 8 years, and that might sound insane to
Gosh.
some people because they might be like, you could have done that in like four, which is true. I probably could have, but I was making like not that much money, even though I had three jobs.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
I put in a lot of effort to try to pay it down, but in a way, I was kind of working backwards because even though I was working a lot, I just wasn't making enough money to pay it down. And I also wasn't really changing much of my habits. Like I was still doing the cash, I was still paying down, I still had a plan. But again, I was still an impulse shopper. Like I didn't fix the problem. I just
Mhm.
saw the debt and thought that I need to pay the debt off. Great. But I still fed into my impulses and
Right.
still bought like the bags and the designer stuff just because I still had that mentality of like, well, I'm paying it down, like, but I should be able to live now. I still traveled, still did that stuff.
Mhm.
If I could go back, I would have changed so many things. I would have been out of debt so much sooner.
Still though, like I feel like yeah, 8 years sounds like a long time, but it makes sense with that it's like a lot of debt.
Yeah.
In hindsight, of course you could have done it faster or in like a better way, but I think the fact that you even did it in the first place is like pretty remarkable.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of work. It was hard.
Do you believe that our 20s should be for grinding it out and saving as much as possible versus I feel like everyone gets to adulthood in their 20s, but really we're just like baby adult. Most of us don't have the financial knowledge. We certainly didn't learn it in school unless we majored in math or anything like that. We have more access to money and we have more control over how we spend that money. And so most of us blow it or we don't spend it responsibly or in ways that we need to live life properly. What's your take? Should we be investing a lot in our like youth and then enjoying it more when we're older or how do you feel?
I love this question because I was just having this conversation with my dad literally 2 days ago. And talking about how this is what I told my dad. I was like, I wish somebody told me when I first started getting a job, like I got a job, my first job at 16. I wish somebody sat me down and said, like, listen, for 10 years, grind it out, work all the shifts. Your body's able to like take the beating, work the two jobs, the three jobs, whatever. Save up your money, invest early, and buy assets. And then that way, when you're in your 30s and in your 40s, you can make work optional in the sense, not saying like you don't have to work, but like optional in the sense that maybe you might have like a rental property, or you can work a job that doesn't maybe pay a lot, but you can do something you like, or maybe start that business. Like when I'm 30, I want to start that coffee shop thing that I had, that idea that I've been wanting to do since I was 16. Like you have that option because you kind of set yourself up early. That's what I wish. I know for a fact that I'd be so much farther than I am right now had I taken that advice, if somebody had given me that advice.
To your point, if you grind it out and you're then into your 30s, like you don't necessarily have to rely on your job as your sole income. Like you have other ways that are coming into your pot. It takes
Yeah.
also the pressure off of like work. In our 20s and into our 30s, we put so much pressure on work because that's like our only income. And so then we get into that burnout or that hustle culture of just working to ensure that we're making enough money.
And even then, I was just talking to my dad about this as well. We're talking about hustle culture because I keep saying, like, oh, I'm in grind mode. I share that all the time, even with my followers. And I have to like say that like grind season is just for a season. And I feel like people like
Mhm.
to make that whole lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, that leads to burnout. And that leaves like, when you see like the 30 and 40-year-olds, even the 50-year-old, 60-year-old at work and they're clocking in, they don't want to be there. They're
Mhm.
tired. And I feel like the season in your 20s.
When you said that you have the ability to work so many jobs in your 20s because, like, you're young, you're limber, like, you just have so much energy.
Yeah.
And I remember also working, like, 2 jobs, like, 1 full-time job, and then I would do, like, a part-time job at night, and I would do that literally all through the week and on weekends. I was exhausted, but, like, I could do it. Now if I had to do
God.
that, I literally would not be well. I would not be okay. It's something to definitely think about if someone's in that, possibility or at that age to actually do that so that they could get ahead. I like that a lot.
And it's that sense of like, oh, when you retire, when you're 65, you get to do all these things. But who wants to do all that at 65 when you can be
Yeah.
enjoying yourself
Mhm.
earlier, whether
So true.
regardless of when earlier is, 50s, could be 40s, doesn't matter, but
Mhm.
like earlier.
Yeah. Or even having, like, a taste of it when you're in your 30s or 40s, like, you can do, like, 75% work and then 25% is, like, your own time, whereas, like, right now, personally, I'm doing, like, 95% of work and, like, 5% of, like, my own time, right?
Yeah.
What's the best piece of financial advice someone has given you?
It's not necessarily advice that someone has given me personally, but I always share about how I used to watch this YouTuber who would share her budget breakdowns. She was like very transparent with her income and like where her money was going. She had a plan for her money. And watching that was the first time I saw that somebody can make a large sum of income a month, between like 15, 17, sometimes $18,000 in a month. And like in my mind, that was so foreign to me. I was just like, I didn't know people can make that much money in a month. That's insane. And I feel like that was the first time that kind of clicked. I don't know why I thought that was like so weird to me, but it was the first time in my mind that people can make more income, first of all, but you don't have to work just one job to make that. You can make multiple streams of income. So that was the first time I was just like open up to that. Because before I was making like maybe like 2,000, maybe 3,000 a month. And I was thinking like, well, that's all I can make. That's all my job pays me. Like what am I supposed to do? I can't think of any best financial advice, but just watching that, that was the best financial opening to my world. That was seeing someone making a large sum of income a month and realizing that I don't need to just work one job or rely on one source of income to make,
Right.
like, I'm not an anesthesiologist. Like, how do I make the money? I didn't realize that you can make multiple sources.
It's actually really interesting. I feel like it's a recent movement, I think, with just being, like, in social media and everything, that people are more willing to share their income, and I, like, love it too because not that I wanna compare myself to anyone else, but it's good to know what people are making out there as 1 for motivation, and 2 also so that you can be somewhat competitive and understand, okay, I'm making this much. I don't have the same amount of skills as this person does, or maybe I'm lacking in these areas. But if I work towards these goals or I level up and get these credentials or whatever, I could be making this. Or it could be like a complete career switch, and like you said, with the multiple sources of income or revenues or streams of income, maybe I divvy up my time and be a little bit more strategic in how I'm spending my time so that I can have more streams of revenue, because like you, I had no idea that that was even possible, and, like, the career trajectory, like, it's changing, right? Like, people don't just have one job, like, that I feel like is not the norm anymore.
Yeah, that's not the norm at all. For example, so many people message me and they're just like, "Oh, like, how do I make more money? I like my job only pays me $3,000 a month," and they're just working the one job. And I keep telling them like, "Oh, like what other things can you do that can bring in more revenue?" For example, my sister's a kindergarten teacher, and so she just has her one job. I always see her like up late on weekends doing her lesson plans, and I'm like, why don't you sell those? Like so many people would buy a lesson plan. Even you would. Like you're using your weekends and like you're summers to create lesson plans for your school. And I'm just like, you could buy those things like that. I'm just like, this, it's so easy. Well, I don't want to say it's too, it takes work.
Yeah, it takes work, but also like you're right when it's like be strategic about what you're doing. So like your sister, if she's already teaching and she's already doing this work, I guess maybe we're not like educated enough to know that people want that and people would pay for that, right? We just your sister's probably like, "Oh, I do this all the time for work. Who is going to want to buy this?" But it's sort of like, yes, people will actually pay for this to ease their own workload.
Yeah.
Every episode, I share a submission from a listener telling us a time in their lives when they had no idea what they were doing. So, Molly from Instagram wrote in specifically about managing money. So, I thought it was very fitting for this episode. She says, becoming financially independent was definitely a tough time for me because I had to learn how to budget. I had to learn what to buy, what not to buy, paying for my own bills, and literally anything I wanted. It comes down to knowing what I need and what I want. And I think that that aligns really well with your mission, Deidre. Can you break down how one can start a budget and furthermore, how grand or how small it should be to make a noticeable difference?
I feel like that's so relatable. But I also want to say the thought or the word budget or budgeting is so icky in some people's minds. They associate it with restriction and like something like that's a task that's not fun. And I always like to like rephrase what budgeting means so that people can like see it from a different lens. So a budget, you're telling your money what to do and where to go. That's all it is. So everything else you think about budgeting, just toss it out for a bit and just think about, okay, I'm going to tell my money what to do and where to go. So it's going to go here to bills. It's going to go here. Just tell your money what to do. That's all budgeting it is.
It sounds like you're like really in control. It's kind of sexy.
I agree. I definitely agree with that. I have like a list of steps that I give someone who has never budgeted before, or if they have fallen off their budget, this works perfectly for them as well. And I always start with the first thing, which I think is the most important thing, is having a reason why, like a strong reason why that you want to budget, because that will be the thing that will keep you budgeting month after month. Because if you're just like, okay, I'm going to budget because like, I'm an adult now and like this is what I'm supposed to do, it's good. You're going to budget for like 2-3 months and then you're going to fall off. But when you have like a strong reason why, then that's going to be the thing that makes it into a habit. And then you're just doing it. You're not even thinking about it. You're just budgeting. It's like 5 minutes of your day, and then not even your day, it's probably entire month. And then it's just done. So that's what we want. And the why is the thing that you need. So I always say like your why could be anything. It could be like, okay, well, I want financial freedom. I want to be able to go to restaurants whenever I want. I don't want to have to be like, oh, I can't afford this. If you're that person, you're like, I want to be the person that says like, yeah, I can do this. I can buy the shirt that I want, things like that. Or it could be like, you know what, I need to save for a down payment and I have a 2-year deadline. Like I need to budget. That's a strong reason why. So I always start with a strong reason why. That's step number one. And then when I think of a budget, or even if you use a template or use my template, or if you use a pen and paper. So the second step is to list your bills and your savings and your debts. And I do it in this order for a reason, and I'll explain why later. So you just list your bills, any debt payments that you pay out, and any regular savings that you already put towards, whether that's like retirement, whatever it's naturally you're saving towards. And this is not like a wish list. This is not a dream. This is what my dream budget's going to look like. I want to start putting 500 towards this. And if you're not doing it right now, just leave it out. We can always go back and change it. Step number 3, I always say go back 3 months of your spending history. And you can find that if you use a credit card, you can find that online, and print that out and then highlight the things that pop up the most, because those will be the things that will tell you what your categories are in your expenses. So right now we're trying to figure out our expense categories. So that will be like, you'll notice like, oh, okay, take out, cut out a lot. So I'm going to name one takeout. And I see that I'm shopping for clothes a lot. That's clothing. You're going to add the 3 months of all of those expenses. And then you're going to just divide it by 3 to get your monthly number. And we're going to use that as your budget because it's what you've already been spending anyway. So it shouldn't be much of a difference. But this will shock you because it'll be one of those things where you will see that you spend like 3,000 on Uber Eats in the last 3 months. And then you're like, okay, so my budget is $1,000 for Uber Eats. Like that's insane. Like you're going to see that it's insane, but that's what you were spending for. So yeah, that is insane. So we're just going to live within that. And you're probably not even going to spend it because you're naturally going to be like, oh, I can never spend $1,000 on Uber Eats. But we're going to live within the guidelines that you've already been spending as your first budget. Because if you start budgeting an ideal budget, you're not going to stick to it because you're going to feel like it's restrictive. It's going to look good on paper, but it's not realistic. And we want to be realistic. And then, so next is step number 4. We're going to go and we're going to figure out our income. And I love placing this step number 4 because it is so easy to adjust and tweak your budget to make it look good and to fit in with your income. But when you are putting your numbers out already and then you see like, oh wow, I don't have enough income to cover what I've been spending, then you're gonna, like a little bomb comes off. I always say it's so easy to cut back on your spending, but there's only so much cutting back that we can do. You can always make more money. You're gonna have to sacrifice your time for sure, but that's an option rather than cutting back your lifestyle and then again falling off your budget because it's not realistic. And then after that, we're going to start tracking your spending. And the thing about tracking your spending, which might seem insane to some people, is like, they're like, well, I'm supposed to write down everything I buy. Like, that's insane. But yeah, you are. like you might eventually get to a point where you don't have to track your spending anymore. But if you're starting off, I always say track your spending because then that way you can get a realistic idea if you're living within the guidelines that you set for yourself. You can say, okay, I'm not spending my grocery money on shoes. Like once you get into a normal budget routine, you can say like, okay, like I usually spend say $900 a month and I know that I spend 250 on groceries. Like I'm not going to accidentally buy a jacket. You'll get into that kind of routine of your budget. But if you're first starting out, track your spending, see if it matches up within the guidelines that you're spending. And then you're able to see in real time if you're going over budget in a certain category. And then you can cut that out right away. Those are the steps that I always give.
I love those. And for listeners, we actually did a little bit of a budgeting exercise. So I had to complete all of these steps. And let me tell you, I was extremely humbled doing this exercise. I wrote to Deidre and I was like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. But I think that is the point. Like you look at things because when you spend and you don't track your each purchase and you don't look at your overall budgets, of course you're gonna like go overboard and you're going to spend the crazy numbers like the 3K on Uber Eats and everything. So mine wasn't necessarily that high, but it was high. And I was kind of shell shocked, but I'm really glad that I did it. And I'm looking forward to this exercise. So why don't we hop in? I provided you the numbers. So I'm going to let you steer. I'm going to let you drive. Take us on like a session of if you're working one-on-one with other people, how it would typically go once they've filled out your template.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll just go over basically the stuff that I just said really quickly within your numbers. So I asked you to, number one, was come up with the reason why. And you can share your reason why. I don't remember if you wrote that in your.
I didn't actually include it. No, I didn't, but we can chat it through now. Do we all need to do that?
Yeah, for sure. It's the most important step.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair. My reason why, that's actually a good question because I don't even know if I have one. Is that bad? Like, do people say that?
No, that's normal. That's completely normal. But the thing about it is you can always come up with a reason why, and your why can always change as well.
True. Okay. I feel like my reason well, first off, why I found you on TikTok was I do want to be like financially responsible. And I do want to feel like I am in control of my finances. And I don't necessarily think I feel that way right now because one, I'm not very financially literate. I don't have a budget. I sort of get the income and I
and I
allocate it
allocate it
accordingly,
accordingly,
but I
but I
don't
don't
feel
feel
necessarily
necessarily
satisfied
satisfied
by
by
where
where
all of
all
my
of my
money's
money's
going.
going.
And
And
I feel
I
like
feel
that's
like
a little
that's a
bit
little bit
risky.
risky.
Like I
Like I
don't
don't
feel
feel
super
super
comfortable when I
comfortable when
get
I get
paid, and
paid,
I
and I
want to
want to
feel in
feel in
control and I
control and
want
I
to
want to
feel
feel
satisfied
satisfied with
with where my
where my
money is
money is
going.
going. So what I'm hearing is your reason why would be, I feel like we're in therapy. What I'm hearing is your reason why would be that you want more for yourself in the sense that you want to feel confident with your money, you want to be comfortable, you want to be able to tell your money basically where to go and what to do.
Yeah, you're right.
I also want to know, couple that with if you have any like long-term plans or anything that you are looking forward to doing or having. It could be near future.
That's good. Okay, so for context, I just moved in with my partner. Prior to that, I've been like single for forever. So I guess if we were to ask me like prior to meeting my partner, it would have been to be more to feel like totally 100% confident on my own financially, not have to like worry about, oh, I don't have someone else to go in on like a house or anything like that. Now that I live with my partner, obviously things are cheaper because we're splitting everything. That said, I've moved into his house. So us to buy a new house is like very long term down the road. I would say like 10 plus years, if that. We're thinking about like moving to the GTA. Like, are we going to buy? Are we going to rent? We haven't really had those discussions yet because we're out of the GTA right now, just sort of enjoying like nesting, I guess you could call it right now. So I think maybe that's actually a good conversation for us to have is like, okay, like 10 years down the line, like where do we actually like see ourselves? I would really like to have money not to use at my disposal because I don't want to go spending it, but like let's say something were to happen and I don't have like a 9 to 5 job anymore, like I'm going to be okay. I think that's the thing that, no, to cliche as it sounds, keeps me up at night is like, oh, like what happens if I don't have a job, like a 9 to 5? Like, am I going to like, how is my way of life going to work? Like, am I going to be able to afford it? Like, what's going to happen? Right. So I think that would probably be like my goal right now.
That's a good reason why. That's like a really strong reason why. Yeah. So that's great. So we just figured out your reason why. Okay. So now we have the reason why. I made you list out your bills, which is not bad at all. I'm like looking at it. Do you mind if I share the numbers?
Oh, go ahead. Share it all. Mention it
Yeah.
all. Mention it all.
Your bills come up to roughly a little under $260, like your fixed bills. After that, I asked you to list your debt and your regular savings contributions. And that was $733 towards debt. And then your savings, so another 800 and something so dollars. And then I made you go back 3 months and write out all your expenses, your daily spending. And that by 3, and that came out to a nice chunk of money.
God, it was so bad. But yeah, you go ahead and talk about that, Deidre.
Yeah. So explain to people to do this exercise. I say again to go back 3 months, tally it all up, like include it all, and then divide it by 3 to get the monthly number. So it says groceries, you spend about $230, clothing around $440, fast food, $582.
Dear Lord.
Coffee, $82.
Okay, pause for a second. I thought that one was going to be much higher. I was like, this is good for me to know because if you were to ask me point blank, what do you spend more money on, takeout food or coffee? I would have totally said coffee. And I always like beat on myself to be like, oh, well, you can't be spending money on coffee because you spend so much already. But it's like, I also am very much of the person if you can work it into your budget, it's not really um something to like speak down to yourself about. Like if you like going out
I
and taking
agree.
yourself out for coffee, then and it works within your means, then do it, right? So this was I just wanted to say this was very eye-opening that I spend more money on takeout food than takeout coffee.
I actually agree with that. And I'll go deeper into that a bit later. The next one was gas, which was $86. Self-care, about $500. Dog care,
Oh God.
the look on your face.
Yeah.
Don't be ashamed. So your real spending
Yeah.
numbers. Um, a dog care, $260, and then entertainment, $113. So that's around $2,300 a month just on everyday spending.
Mhm.
So this is what I tell people. So I say, even though some of it might look ridiculous, like you're going to look at your takeout food and you're like, I'm not going to spend, like, even though that's my budget, I'm not going to spend $582. You might think that. If I were to tell you to create a budget, fresh budget, like without these numbers, not knowing these numbers, you're going to put like takeout at $100. It's going to be so
Yeah.
unrealistic.
True.
And you're going to beat yourself up because you're going to be like, oh, I'm over budget. Like, I can't believe I'm over. You're going to see all this red in your budget, and it's not going to make you want to continue budgeting because you're like, well, I already messed up this month. I'm not going to track anymore. I will pick it up next month. And then you're not going to pick it up next month. I always say, just live within the numbers that you were already spending. You were spending this. So it
Mhm.
shouldn't be that much of a problem to continue to
Right.
spend the same way, but just track it. The next step was your income. So we went to step number 4. And so now that we have like your bills, your expenses, your debt, your savings already set out, we're looking at your income. So your income is 3,765 roughly. So if you see at the quick view summary right at the closer to the bottom on the bottom right, it says that your income, so your incoming is $3,765.36. And then what you're budgeting or your budget to spend is $3,381.71. So you'd have $383 left over. That might be enough for some people to be like, oh, $300 left over. That's great. But if you have any savings goals, you're not going to be able to hit that $383. You not be able to put more on your debt if you wanted to, or more into savings.
Mhm.
Like something would have to give within your expenses in a way. So that's why I always tell people to like do the income portion fourth. That way you're not
Yes.
creating a budget that's like, okay, well, my income is $3,700. Let me just like fudge the numbers a bit so that it looks like I have a lot more left over. Because we created a fresh budget for you for September, we don't have your tracking because this would begin in September. But after that, you would just be tracking your spending against the budget numbers that you set for yourself. Well,
Got it.
that you've been spending.
Yeah.
And that's basically the route that we would
I
take
love
you
it.
through.
Oh my gosh. Okay, this is so exciting because I'm gonna do this for September.
Yeah,
I'm gonna follow up with
I'm
you,
so
but I'll
excited for
also
you. Yeah,
thank you. But I'm also gonna follow up with listeners too, and like maybe we can do it all together if people like want to actually get serious about their finances. Because I had posted this on Instagram, and there were so many people that responded that were like, I don't budget. I don't know how to budget. Like, I've never been exposed to resources that could teach me about money. This is really exciting. Like, the way that you explained it is perfect because it's not like we're, like you said, finagling the numbers within our specific income, but it's looking realistically at what we're already
mhm,
spending. And that is so much more realistic. Like, it doesn't feel like
yeah,
such a burden. And you're so right. Like, it makes me excited. It's like, yeah, I want to track it. And it's
yeah,
almost like a game to underspend what we have budgeted in the expenses. Like, I feel like it's a
yeah,
game. Like, I'm like, I want to get underneath it. Right. So it like sort of
yeah,
challenges you to not spend, where it's like before I was like, yeah, charge it, charge, just like, you know what I mean?
yeah. It might be an unpopular opinion, but I always say it's great to live below your means.
Mhm.
But sometimes if you're looking at your budget and you're like, okay, well, I am living below my means in the sense that I'm not out here buying this and that. Like I'm just paying for what I normally buying, like I need my food, my clothes, whatever. I'm not doing excessive amounts of shopping or stuff like that. Then you'll quickly see that your income might be the problem, and that might be the motivation for you to use your income. I love that you can clearly see like, okay, well, if I want to live comfortably, say you're living comfortably right now and you have $383 left over, then you might think to yourself, okay, I need to find another source of income. I might need to, maybe put in more hours just so I can hit a few goals. Maybe it might be a grind season for like 4 months. I mean, something like that, like really nail out something or like knock off like your, say for example, your Visa card. If you pay that off, $100 back into your pocket, like things like that. So you're able to see that clear as day.
And I feel like my issues and like barriers that have prevented me from becoming financially literate are that one, I hate math and I'm also terrible at it.
Mhm.
Like I've just never been that person that gets it. I think it's like left and right brain. And I think I'm very much more right brain. Whatever brain is like more creative, that's just how I am.
Yeah,
And I also don't want to like go against like, oh, like women are bad at math, but I've definitely like instilled that in myself. And I think a lot of
yeah.
women do that. And you are not doing that. So first off, like kudos to you because it is hard to just fall into that mind trap of like, oh, well, like I'm not good at my budget. I don't manage my finances. I'm just not good at math and just like let it be a problem for another day. So
Yeah.
what's your
Uh,
advice for others who are not confident about their finances? People like me who think that they're bad at math, but like necessarily you don't necessarily need to be good at math to take care of your finances.
hmm. No, not at all. Because if we go back and remember what I said, that you're just telling your money what to do and where to go. And if we are just doing that, then it should be pretty, I don't want to say it's pretty simple, but it's not as hard as you think. Like you
Right.
might be overthinking it. So
Yeah.
there's also another thing with budgeting. There's different methods of budgeting out there. Like what might work for you might not work for your friends. Like there's different methods. And I always say the best budgeting method is the one that works for you. Like it might not be tracking, maybe tracking your spending might not be a thing, and that's fine, but you're still telling your money what to do. Maybe it's like, okay, you know what? This goes out automatically. I have auto payments to my bills, auto payments to my debt and savings, and I'm spending what's left over. And maybe I won't track that. Maybe it's just like, okay, I have $1,000 left to spend, and I'm just going to spend that freely as I wish. And that's it. I won't track it, but that that's your other savings goals or your other categories are being handled, being taken care of. And that's great. That's budgeting too. But the method that I use, which is kind of not that popular, is the month ahead budget. So I love budgeting using my income from last month, and then everything I make in the month goes to next month, because I have a very, like, my income is irregular. So I love the fact of knowing that I know exactly how much I'm going to save, spend, give at the beginning of the month, and it's already done. All my transfers are made, and I just spend over. So that might work for somebody else.
Yeah, I like that. It kind of it goes back to my goal of I just want to feel financially secure and like let's say I don't have a job tomorrow. I mean, it's only 1 month ahead, but still that's better than no months ahead. Like I kind of like that
Yeah.
financial security. You just you're at ease. What are your top 3 financial terms that you think people in their 20s and even in their early 30s should know and incorporate into their budget or their vocabulary or just get more familiar with?
Remember how before I was talking about your like variable and your fixed expenses? I feel
Yes.
like that is something you should know. So your fixed is like fixed bills is the things that you need to pay them on time or you'll get penalized. They're your bills that are due. So that will be like your mortgage or your rent, things like that need to be paid. So those are like priority. Your variable expenses are things that are necessary, but they're also nice to have as well. So you can cut back if you need to, you can cut them out. Maybe it's, I don't know, subscription or something. Like if you need to get rid of it or cut back on that, you can do that all you want. So those two, very, very important to know. Emergency fund and sinking fund. Oh, let me talk
Ooh.
about this.
Okay, yeah.
So, well, yeah. So emergency fund, because some people ask me, they're like, oh, like, what's an emergency fund? What's a sinking fund? And I feel like knowing this, because even having these alongside your budget is so important. Again, we're talking about how if you lost your job, like you would, if you were a month ahead, it'd be great. But if you had an emergency fund, even better. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
so an
yeah.
emergency fund, yeah. So an emergency fund, which is so important to have. I always say, and I've heard other people say before too. So I'm not coining it as my own thing, but like not having an emergency fund is an emergency. That's it's so true because I had to live on my emergency fund during the 2020. So I am a strong advocate for having an emergency fund. So that is basically putting money aside for an emergency, and an emergency will happen whether you don't think it will or not. Something's bound to happen, whether that is like your car breaking down unexpectedly, or like somebody passed away, you have to fly out to, Italy to go see your family for the funeral, or, job loss, like we mentioned, something, having like a little cushion aside for an emergency, that so you don't have to use your earned income that month or go into debt to pay for it, is so important to have. And most people say have 3 to 6 months as your emergency fund. But I say have the amount that makes you comfortable. So that might be more than 6 months. It might be less than 6 months. It might be whatever you're comfortable with. But like not too low.
Yeah.
But I always feel like that number is different for everyone. But the guideline of 3 to 6 months is a good guideline to have. But
Okay.
also, I would say what you're comfortable with.
Sure. And where do you keep this fund? Like, what account would you put that in?
I keep mine in a high interest savings account or high yield savings account, and that will yield you between like 2.5%, depending on what bank you go to. There's EQ, there's I use Simple, so many other ones. So EQ Bank, Neo, Simple, if you're Canadian. Putting in a high interest savings account, you're not really thinking about it. It's like, for example, I have this one mentor who he thinks, oh, then again, he's a millionaire, so he doesn't really think the way I think, but he thinks having money sit idle in a high interest savings account is pointless. But for regular folks like us,
Yeah.
I feel like I can't just sell a house to like
Yeah.
keep the
No,
money.
for sure.
So I think it's so important. And even if it's just sitting there collecting little 2.5% or whatever,
Hmm.
having that peace of mind is so much more worth than making money off of it. So the savings fund, yeah. So that's just future plan spending. So you're just putting your money in account, same high interest savings account. You might want to have it in a different bucket or name it something else, but that's something that you're going to pull out of regularly, and it's something that'll be like, okay, I know my car needs a tune-up, or I'll need new tires. Let me put money in that account for that. Or it could be for a vacation that's coming up. Anything. I put my personal care in a sinking fund because I like to spend freely in that category. So I know, like, okay, I'm gonna be pulling out of it instead of me budgeting for it every month and like, pulling it out of my income every month. How about I just put a large sum? I put $1,000 away into a high interest savings account, and then whatever I want to get, like a facial or like go to Sephora or something
Hmm.
like that, I just pull it from that account. So having a sinking fund is great. And I actually had this one lady message me today actually, and she was just like, oh, she gave me the idea of having a sinking fund for seasonal. She's like, oh, I should have a seasonal sinking fund. That way, like when the seasons change, you
Hmm.
can just go buy your clothes, buy the boots, whatever, and
Yeah.
it's already sitting there for you. And you'll have to like go into debt, or like if you see something that's on sale, I love this, you could just buy it. So sinking fund.
It sounds to me like, based off my goals, that I need to start looking at an emergency fund and a sinking fund and figuring out how to get those set up and initiated and start contributing to those.
Yeah. So your sinking fund will just be like, you can even like calculate whatever things that you want into it, and then divide it by how many months you want to, or how much you could put into it each month. And then just make that as a regular savings contribution every month.
Yeah.
But your emergency fund is number one.
I love that. This is getting me so excited. I love it. It's like
Yeah,
like I'm
I'm so excited for this.
the wheels are turning. The wheels are turning. This is awesome. What led you to share your financial story online?
Oh, yes. Okay. So I love transparency. Like when other people are sharing like how much they make and what they're spending and things like that, I'm not the person that's like, oh, you're bragging, like humble brag. Like, those people who will say things like that. I'm the person that's just like, okay, like tell me more. Like, how did you do this? How can I do this? I'm the type of person that like, if I see you do something, then I know that I can do it too. And even like, I do that with everything. That's my mindset for everything. Like even when I started driving, like driving on the highway was scary to me. I'm like, how do people do that? But if people are doing it, then that means I can do it too. So like, that's how I think. In my mind, I was just like, okay, well, if I am sharing like budgeting and savings tips, like I'm going to share my journey as well. I'm going to be transparent with my income and like what I'm spending
Right.
and what I'm saving, because it was that person that on YouTube who I watched their budget breakdown, and they were sharing what they're saving and spending and what they're making. And that encouraged me to increase my income and get multiple streams of income. So I was just like, okay, well, if that if that person had that impact on me, then I can have that impact on other people. I used to get messages, I don't get them anymore, but like when I first started out, I used to get messages of like people would DM me and they'd be like, oh, like you shouldn't share your numbers online. Like you have to be sensitive, or this is out of touch. You have to be sensitive to how people are making like minimum wage, and like
Mhm.
people are struggling to buy their groceries, and you're over here making X amount of money. And I thought to myself, like, if I didn't share, then I'm not helping people realize that they can get out of that situation. So I never agreed with that. I was just like, no, because then I wouldn't be where I am if somebody didn't share.
No,
But
and it's so true. It was so inspirational and refreshing because money is such a taboo subject still now. And it was just
yeah,
so nice to see you, one, being so knowledgeable about it. I was like, I need to do some research because everything that she is saying, I'm like, I have no idea what she's talking about. But I I thought it was so interesting. It was so cool and, like I said, refreshing, and it's like I wanted to get to a place where I felt comfortable to talk about money with my friends or family or, like, literally whoever, right? Because if
yeah,
you are in control, like you said, and you're telling your money what to do, it really shouldn't be such a taboo subject.
yeah. I always thought it was weird, even growing up, like my parents really didn't talk about money much. The only like money instances I remember like growing up was that my mom was cutting up her credit cards. And I remember my mom told me when I was really little, she was like, oh, no one's going to marry you if you have debt. I remember she said those two things, like the cutting out the credit cards and the debt. So I always felt like, okay, my perception of money was like credit cards are bad and don't have debt. And so that was it. There was no other money talks. As an adult, I always felt, even when I was deeply in debt and I had no shame of sharing that I had debt and I was going through it, I thought it was weird that people didn't talk about it. And I was just like, nah, yeah, I'm paying off my debt. I just love transparency. I just feel like everyone should talk about it, make it normal. I feel like we talk about everything else, even the grossest stuff.
Yeah, there are some things
There's
we don't
so
need to
much.
be sharing on the internet, and I would say financial wellness and managing your money is not one of them.
Exactly, right? Right, that is so true.
Can you share with listeners and people who will be eventually listening to this episode where they can find you online, the products that they can purchase from you, like your budget tracker, anything that you are currently working on? Where can they find you online?
Yeah, so I am OU Budget with two H's, so OHHU Budget, YOU Budget, on all platforms. I have some like scammer accounts trying to like
You're
try
that
to message
popular
my
now that you
followers.
got all the scammy
Hey, yeah,
accounts.
I know, I made it. Thanks. Yeah, so being mindful of like how it's spelled. I even pinned a post on my Instagram saying like this is my only account. So yeah, so I'm on OU Budget on all platforms. I sell budgeting templates and savings trackers and year-to-date dashboards on my Etsy shop. And I'm coming out with a website. I have someone working on it as we speak. So that should come out like in the fall. So if you go on my Etsy and you're interested in getting a budgeting template, there are two different types, which is the regular annual budget is the one that you are using. And then you have the month ahead budget, which is using last month's income to fund this month's paycheck. But you get access to both templates because sometimes people are a month ahead. They've saved up to be a month ahead. And then they find themselves using the current month's income to cover some bills and expenses. And then they realize, you know what, like I'm not a month ahead, like I'm touching what I shouldn't be touching. So they switch over to the regular template. And most people actually work their way to being a month ahead. So right now they're not, and they're saving up a little by little so that they can live off what they saved to be a month ahead. And it comes in pink and blue.